Developers and builders who've been red flagged will not be able to sell high-rise apartments in New South Wales without a new mandatory inspection. The New South Wales Government will identify risky players in the construction sector and subject them to pre-sale checks in a bid to prevent a repeat of the high-profile Opal and Mascot tower defects. Joining us live now is New South Wales Building Commissioner David Chandler. David, thank you for your time. Now, how do you practically do this? I know from a journalist's perspective, when we try and chase people like this, we often get slapped with some kind of defamation suit. How do you actually keep track of people who've been engaging in what you say is poor behaviour?
Well, Annalise, there's many tools available to a modern regulator, and these are often driven by digital capabilities that have not previously been available. So it's not really about exposing yourself to defamation. It's a case of just looking into those people who are building buildings and starting to identify those that potentially have more risks attached to them than others. So this doesn't necessarily make a judgment. It just allows a regulator to be more effective as to where you apply your resources. But this is just one of a number of measures that the government is initiating in New South Wales to rebuild confidence in the New South Wales residential market.
But practically though, how would you decide that someone is a risky player?
Well, it's now possible to very effectively join together the profiles of developers, builders and certifiers by connecting ABN numbers, the relationship between the parties, their past performances. There's a whole bunch of data that's now available to regulators in a format that has never really been available before. It allows you to automate and apply data analytics in a way that really allows you to get in front of the game rather than be behind it. So look, you can imagine that all authorities are using modern tools to do far more effective risk analysis and get into the front of the game much earlier than they have before.
So if you would like the power to be able to designate people as risky players and that would then trigger an audit, would this be something that anyone could look up and find out if their builder was on that list?
Well, eventually I would hope that we have a publicly available resource, but initially what we'll do is that we'll build this tool and we'll prove it, and we'll start to refine it and then look at what its potential beyond that is. But look, the main goal here is, as you may be aware, that New South Wales no longer requires customers to settle on residential apartments if there isn't an occupancy certificate. So one of the opportunities we've got to do is to have a look at what sort of risk matrix we could apply to sensing which occupancy certificates should have a more detailed look before they're made. And this is really an initiative to see if we can start to reduce the number of buildings that are being handed over to customers with some of the issues that we've seen more recently in the media.
One of the things I found interesting with this push as well is that you're saying you want to target phoenixing. That's not an issue just isolated to the building industry, but we know there are a lot of players who do declare bankruptcy, move on, call themselves something else and keep doing the same thing. How do you think that you could practically address that in the building industry?
Well, one of the troubles with phoenixing is that, and insolvency in fact, is that we get to see and respond to it after the fact, and there's got to be a better way to that in the future. And using predictive analytics and tools to identify those players that could present those sorts of risks is, I think, what a modern regulator ought to be doing. If we're in a position where there's a culture among people who are habitual phoenixers or risky players, they don't have a long-term outlook as to the responsibilities they have under the law to build buildings in accordance with the Building Code of Australia, and in fact in accordance with the development consents that they have. So this is a way of actually getting in front of those occupancy certificates and starting to make sure that there's a much higher level of test applied before they're issued and before customers are required to settle. So this will have a direct impact on those people who think they can just simply build buildings and slide them across to consumers and then walk away with no no responsibility. We want to get ahead of that. So stopping that game is a far better practice, in my view, than mopping up afterwards.
And just in the instance that this situation is triggered in that there is an inspection, and if the inspection finds the building is wanting in some way, what happens then? Does that stop the sale going through? Does that put the onus on the builder to then remediate the property?
Well, look, the details of how the regulation will be stood up will be taken to the Parliament in the new year. But this is one of a number of tools. I mean, the issues that, or the requirements that are in the new Design and Building Practitioners Bill provide another element of turning around the making of buildings that are not up to what customers can expect. So this is just simply one of the front end tools, what I would call a leading indicator as opposed to a trailing indicator. So I think this will make a huge difference in starting to change the landscape and get those people who think that you can build a building with all care or no care and no responsibility to actually rethink again, because as I say, we've got the resources, the people that already exist within the Office of Fair Trading and the resources that are available there are the best frontline resources that I could hope to have. It's a case of giving them more impactful opportunities to be involved earlier, and this is an example of that.
Knowing what you know about the building industry in New South Wales, would you buy an apartment in Sydney?
Yes, I certainly would, but I'd do it with my eyes wide open. I mean, what I'd look to do is to find developers that have got a track record for quality buildings. And look, Annalise, I personally believe that we're talking about 60, 70% of the developers that are out there are really trustworthy and very conscious of their brand. In fact, their tolerance now for what we call the risky players and the contagion they bring to the industry is something that they want to work with me to help stamp out. I mean, I really think that this is a part of the market that really is damaging the whole of the market. I see many well-made buildings out there. I personally go to the building sites to actually have a look and see. I'm not going to be someone that claims to be able to go to every building site, but what I do want to do is to go to sites where I can see exhibits of things that need to be attended to and attended to quickly. Unfortunately, some of these are historical and they'll be more difficult to see if we can provide support to, but we really have it in our mandate to make sure that we really do everything that's possible to make sure future buildings in New South Wales meet the expectations of customers.
And just finally, we've seen the Opal Tower, there's more concerns, there might even be more cracks in the building. Do you foresee any other buildings that could be of the same level of issue that we've had with Opal Tower?
Well, I think first of all that Opal Towers should be put to one side as an example. I don't want to go into the details as to what conclusions there will be about making that building, but it's certainly not a building that is a Phoenix building. You've got a very responsible builder stepping up and realising that that building hasn't achieved what its customers expected, and it's spent a lot of money putting that back in place and helping to work with the owners of that building to restore confidence. So it's important that we don't put Opal Towers in the mix of potential players where there was phoenixing involved. In fact, if there had been Phoenix involved at Opal Towers, we'd have a much more dire circumstance on our hands. But I think in the medium term, the issues at Opal Towers will in fact really be resolved to the market satisfaction, and I'm glad that there's a builder who's prepared to step up and do that.
So you're saying none of these reforms that you're proposing now would have helped prevent Opal Towers? Well,
look, the reforms that we are bringing forward, or that the government is bringing forward, for example, in the Design and Building Practitioners Bill, there'll be a much higher focus on the producing of high quality, more complete designs than there's ever been before. And those designs will need to be undertaken by accredited players who will ultimately declare that their designs are fit for purpose, and they'll be responsible for them. Now, I think that the development of design has been an area that has suffered over the last 10 or 15 years, where shortcuts in the design process have been made and there are consequences for that. Similarly, the legislation will require that builders, upon completion of projects in the future, will have to declare that they've built the building in accordance with the declared designs and the Building Code of Australia, and they'll be personally accountable for those buildings going into the future. Now, these are two very, very important bookends that, in fact, the sooner that these are applicable in the marketplace, we'll then have a really good balance of things starting to stand up that show how regulation and other things, other levers around legislation can be applied to multiply the impact. So the mandatory inspections or the risk-rated inspections prior to the issuing of occupancy certificates are just one piece. But the really substantial piece in my mind is rebuilding the industry's capability and focus on well-prepared designs and then declarations that the buildings have been made in accordance with those designs. And at least I see and have regularly visited projects that are under construction right now where the design documentation hasn't been complete, where the work on site doesn't look back to using Australian standards as a guidance for making buildings. We've really got to make sure that that culture is stamped out and that we don't have people making it up in the field. I've seen some terrible examples of that occurring, and we've got to get on top of that immediately.
Absolutely, and I appreciate why you say you want to put Opal Tower to one side because it's not a phoenixing issue, but when you say it's not fit for purpose and to customer satisfaction, these are people who were told that the building might be collapsing on top of them. Many people had their life savings in this building. It goes a lot further than just customer satisfaction, doesn't it? Like, we need to have customers be able to be confident that these buildings are safe. So what can be done to make sure Opal Tower never happens again?
Well, Annalise, you can only do that by making sure that you've got people who are doing the work that they're engaged to do properly. And I think the message that needs to be conveyed, or I want to convey straight away as we go into 2020, is build it right or wear the consequences. Now, that's just not an idle statement. It's one that's conscious of the fact that if we do move to actually getting better prepared documentation, and that requires clients and developers to realise that going into the future, there's no shortcuts with the design and there's no shortcuts in the making of compliant buildings to those designs. So I believe that those two pieces together will start to give us an outlook going forward where much more confidence in the built work can be anticipated. But there's other things that have got to be done. Professional associations have also got to step up. I mean, often we find these problems after the buildings have been made, and you often hear that there's professionals out there that perhaps don't have even their professional colleagues' confidence. So we've got to start to get the professions to also realise that they've got a duty of care to the public and to consumers as well. There's quite a lot of issues that really need to be addressed, and that forms part of an overall matrix of things that this government has minded to initiate and implement in New South Wales. I don't think there'll be any other state within 2 years from now that can claim the sort of impactive turnaround to the industry culture and performance that you're going to see in New South Wales.